Welcome back for another week of the Stephen Sully study, and this is a bit of content that we're also producing for our household name, Woodbury House. I've got a fantastic guest, and I've got to say, a legend in the street art community and genre. Alan Kett, thank you for your time, and thank you for coming onto the podcast, mate.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Right, first and foremost, before we kick off, I've got to apologise to you and also my viewers. I've got a big fat lip because I'm a boxer, and I got punched in the face this morning, and I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm about to do a podcast, and I can't even feel my top lip now. But anyway, there you go. So anyway, I came across you. I mean, I've seen your name pop up so many times, and I've seen your work, but I really got to know you, I feel, because I was watching a documentary, Banksy and the Rise of Outlaw Art, and I thought on there you presented and spoke very well, and I started looking into your work a bit more. So I know you're based in LA. Tell me a bit about your journey, how you got into the art world, Adam.
So I grew up in New York City, in Brooklyn, and growing up there in the 1980s, I was surrounded by graffiti. It was just everywhere. And I discovered it in my neighborhood. I discovered it on my way to school. I discovered it and saw it on the trains. And early on as a teenager, I fell in love with it and started documenting it. And then, eventually as a teenager, started doing it myself. And that sort of never stopped. I just, fell in with good crews and very good friends and all over the world, and painted and traveled. And as I got older, I just did different things, related to it. So yeah, it's just been, it was a natural part of my environment. I was lucky enough to grow in an era where it was there, and in a neighborhood that it was there, and I was attracted to it, and I just jumped into it.
So, as you can probably see in the background, or just vaguely, is a Richard Hamilton's Standing Shadow Man. And I've said this plenty of times on my podcast and on content. I'm not traditionally from the art market. I found myself coming into it by chance, and just like many people that are in art, maybe not artists, but people that collect art or invest into art, I feel that people get pulled into it because of the narrative and story. It's not just about the art itself, the way it looks, the way it feels, and how you can decorate your home or office, but it really is the backstory. And when I started really learning Hamilton's market, I obviously came across some of his affiliates, and then I came across some of his other, connections. Hence why I'm speaking to you now. And thankfully enough, where I've got a podcast and I've been running it now for nearly 3 years, and I'm also a founder of Woodbury House, the brand, I've interviewed Black Rat, who was on that podcast, Cope 2, Out Diaz, who was also spoke about with Jean-Michel Basquiat, Crash, Days, LA2, the list is quite sort of vast. And every one of these artists, some of them have quite similar styles and some of them are quite different, but they all got very, very compelling stories. And I've got to be honest, I don't know if this is going to sound a bit sick in the head, but I'm just going to be honest. Part of the reason why I love you guys from New York is because I love hearing about the controversial stories and the edginess of New York, especially Brooklyn and the Bronx, back in 70s, 80s, 90s, because I heard it was a bit of a wild place at times. So is that something you can verify, and have you got any cool stories?
I can verify that 100%. There's this glamorization of the old days in a way, because people think of the nightclub scene and all these great art shows and, maybe meeting Richard Hamilton. But the 80s, the 70s and the 80s and the 90s in New York City, and in particular in Brooklyn, was a very dangerous place everywhere. It was dangerous everywhere. For me as a scrawny young kid moving around the city, it was wild. It was a very dangerous thing. And so if you could imagine, and I can imagine, maybe, London was the same in certain areas of London or other cities, but there was a lot of crime. There were a lot of criminals. There was a lot of drugs and drug abuse, and there was a lot of poverty. And so really people attacked each other in broad daylight all the time. And teenagers in particular, maybe it was graffiti writers as well, really felt like they had carte blanche in attacking each other. And so it was a bit of a dog eat dog world back then. Riding around in the trains at night or even in the daytime, you didn't know when you were going to get attacked or get into a fight or, meet a rival or someone you didn't even know was your rival. And all of a sudden, you would be in this physical confrontation. And so for me, as a young teenager, growing up in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and traveling around the city, I quickly learned of the dangers of the city and would make sure every morning before I left to go to school that I had a weapon. And so there was like a daily weapons check leaving my house. And the weapons that I chose started off with, a knife, ice picks. I eventually ended up getting ice picks. I thought that was a better choice of a weapon. And then a machete. In the wintertime, I would cut out the pocket of the lining of my jacket. So I would have a very big knife there and eventually other weapons. And so, kind of unfortunately, they had to be, pulled out at times, but it was just sort of the nature of the city. And if you pulled out a big machete, you might be able to avoid a much worse confrontation with 5 other teenagers that might want your watch or your bag, or for me, my camera, because I was going around taking pictures of graffiti. So not a lot of details, but it was just kind of the life that we all lived. And, I think that, many of us that grew up in that era in New York City ended up suffering from PTSD in a way, always thinking that there was someone that's going to jump you from behind or attack you, or, always expecting a punch to the face when you're talking to someone, because that's how it used to be. You might punch somebody in the face or someone would punch you in the face, and then the conversation would go from there. And so it was a very wild time. I definitely got punched in the face and robbed and attacked. And then as a result, I did the same thing as I grew up older, and, kind of just served it back to the next generation.
I'm going to ask something quite direct, but the kid in me, if I don't ask you this, is going to be saying, Steve, why don't you ask him? I'm not going to hold back. Did you ever get shot, stabbed, or did you ever shoot or stab anyone?
I never got shot. I've been shot at a number of times. I'd been, held up at gunpoint or attempted to be held up at gunpoint. It was kind of just one of those things that happened. I have been attacked by knife. I never shot anybody. I perhaps stabbed somebody or cut somebody. I don't know. It was just, sometimes in those melees, you just kind of never know. But I've definitely been hurt in as a teenager in fights, and have been hurt seriously. And so it's not something that I'm proud of or whatever, but it was just kind of par for the course, growing up in sort of an environment that was very violent.
Yeah. Look, I can tell from all the research and all the conversations I've had, the culture back then was, I want to use all the cliche sayings. It was fight or flight, sink or swim, do or die. And I fully get that. So I'm not going to ever endorse, violence or crime or drugs or gang kind of intimidation. However, like I just said, it factored into the life back then. And I personally feel that it stimulated the creativity in a lot of artists, whether that was fashion people who are in music, or clearly street artists. So how did the environment shape your style, Alan?
I think, the environment forced us, many of us to go underground, to paint in abandoned places, to go to the trains and sort of avoid the streets in some way. For me personally, it made me connect with other artists and other writers to sort of form our own gang or our own crew to protect ourselves and to sort of move together, because it was a necessary part of the city. I think that, all that kind of violence or threat of violence or criminality at the time made us all paint a lot faster. It made us really understand the city in a different way and really approach things, painting. I mean, for me, it was always painting on the street or really painting on trains. And so we just wanted to be free, not get arrested, and not meet other people. And so it made us move in groups, made us paint faster, made us paint larger so that we could be noticed, and it made us tough and made our styles a bit aggressive at times. But that's kind of how I see it. I think that, for everybody, it's a bit different. At times it was more about tagging because you had to move faster versus trying to paint something beautiful because you really didn't have the time to stay in one place unless you could figure out, how to get permission for it and paint some mural kind of a thing, which was, pretty seldom.
One of the conversations that always stands out for me, one of my favorite conversations, is with Cope 2. I really like that guy. I just think he is what he is. He's very black and white. He doesn't really pull his punches as far as conversation goes. And I like that about people, And what he told me, and hopefully you can verify this, is when you're tagging, it's kind of to put your stamp on an area. And just like it said in the documentary, the Banksy documentary, it's about, taking over a street, taking over a block, taking over a different neighborhood, etc. And for me, if I were to sort of translate that into modern times, it's a bit like your version of social media now, because people use social media as advertisement, yeah? And then you can get commissions off the back end of that advertisement in a roundabout way. So if you're tagging, certain areas and people start to notice you, they look into your work more, and before you know it, other opportunities may be born off the back end of that. So, talk to me how would you go about, targeting an area? Why would you target one area? I know Cope was saying to me that he targeted certain train lines. Is that something you did?
Yeah, I think that, Cope is an example of someone who is really dedicated to painting and targeted certain areas. For the most part, in those early days, people painted in a manner that was very convenient, meaning most graffiti writers would paint the train line that was their home train line, and they would try to go as close as possible to paint it. They were quite lazy or quite comfortable, and it wasn't something that you had to really travel far to do, because maybe 2 train stations down was a train depot and you could paint there, and everybody from your neighborhood painted there, or all your friends painted there. It's very exceptional to think of writers, maybe like a Cope, and I wouldn't necessarily say him, others that went all over the city painting all over every single train line. That was not normal. Those are the very exceptions to the rules. And it was people like maybe Is the Wiz, Mike Martin, rest in peace, who did that. Or John 1. There's a few people that wanted to do that, Min 1. And so these legendary figures in graffiti history that went around wanting to leave their mark, not only locally in their neighborhood and on their home train line, so all their friends and peers could see it, but the whole entire city, so that they could be sort of a celebrity. And so for me, when I started off, much like what I'm describing, I started wanting to paint my home train line or the trains that I would take to go to school. So I would see it, and so my friends would see it on the way to school, and so I would be recognized by my peers. As I matured and got older and fell in with a group of artists, we painted everything. We painted all the train lines. We painted everywhere, and it didn't really matter. We just wanted to paint, and so we would move from place to place to place. And one night we would paint maybe 4 different locations across the city, so that we would become famous. And the point of it was taking over space, becoming famous amongst our peers, amongst other artists, other writers, and then of course amongst sort of like, people of our generation that understood the trains, that could see the trains and be like, you know what, I don't do that stuff, but I know someone who does it. It's my friend and he's great and whatever. And so, I think we were seeking that sort of recognition, validation. And eventually, I think as we got older, with people like Cope, that you mentioned, or other artists, they sort of understood what they were painting in a larger scale. Maybe Blade is and Lee Quinones are the best examples of this. They stopped painting necessarily for their peers, and they started painting for the city, and their works on trains became murals. And sometimes they abandoned their name and painted other things, or they painted sceneries, or they painted messages. And there, I think, for me, I was lucky to be there. I was, a contributor. I enjoyed myself. I had sort of the best times and the craziest times of my life. But when I think of the best that ever came out of New York City to do this kind of thing that we're talking about, the street art, graffiti art thing, I would have to say Lee Quinones. And if you haven't had him on, you should definitely have him on. And Blade and possibly Scene are the best, of 30 years or 20 years of painting trains. And they just did such exceptional work and were so prolific and still paint till today. And you mentioned something before about the market. No one cared about the market. No one even knew what the hell it was. No one painted for money. It was very, very rare to meet one of, artists from this genre that even had an understanding of monetization or business. I think the first one might have been Tracy 168, who's a pioneer and a legendary figure, and maybe one of the first street artists, because he was doing stencil art. But very early, he was painting murals for money. He had an ad in a newspaper for people to pay him to paint their name on a train, and this is in the 1970s, and so there weren't so many people concerned with that. I think that's something that came much later. Because if you consider when people were starting to paint, they were children, they were preteen, 10 years old, 9 years old, 11 years old, and then teenagers. And then most people quit by the time they were 16. And so it was very few that maintained and kept on. And those are the people that you mentioned earlier, Crash and Days and Cope, who had an opportunity and had this moment, and they went and sought out a career in the arts, and as such are some of the most famous artists of our generation or of this art movement, because they've been doing it now for 40 years commercially, as a business. And so they're I think the exception to the rule. And maybe today we see things much different. There's an art market that accepts this genre of graffiti art or street art. There's the Banksys, there's the Black Barats, there's the Copes, there's, the Retinas, there's all these people, but it wasn't like that growing up. It was 1,000 times the names and nobody making money.
You've basically answered my next question, but I'm going to kind of ask it anyway, because there might be a bit more substance to it. But I'm in business, right? And I try and keep myself fairly educated as far as personal development. I've listened to Tony Robbins. I try and listen to a lot of his content for mindset, for business stuff. Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar. There's a bunch of people out there. And what a common thread is when you do something, whether it's, sport or whether it's business or whatever, a couple of cliche sayings is begin with the end in mind. Plan your work and work your plan. So basically, when you're starting something, have a goal in mind. However, there is the old saying as well, which is success is not a destination. It is a journey. And I'm getting this sensation from you guys that it very much was that journey that you relished. But there must have been in the back of your mind, okay, I'm tagging, and I've been doing this now for many years, and I'm becoming famous in my circle, in my ecosystem, in my neighborhood. But there must have got to a point where you thought to yourself, why am I doing this? Was there ever that point, or not really?
That happened to me recently.
Okay.
And so it's a funny thing that you mentioned that, but I'll tell you this, when you think of youth, and now, we're grown men now, we've been in business for many, many years. We're art collectors. We're passionate about business and growing and being successful. That's not necessarily a teenage mindset. A teenage mindset is, how can I do something crazy and get away with it? How can I be the most popular person so I could have the most girlfriends or get laid? How can I trick my parents into this or that or the other, or how can I become, famous? And so I think that the mindset was so different when you think of a teenage mindset, that people didn't have the end in mind. I did not have the end in mind. And I think that changed as we became adults, or as I became an adult. And I think, for me personally, when the police really started to get involved in my life and the court cases started to appear, that's when I had to consider, okay, do I really want to do this? Is this really worth it? Do I want to be a master criminal, or do I want to be something else? And I think for many of us that have painted illegally for the better part of our lives, there comes a time when we're confronted with serious scrutiny, legal scrutiny from either the city, the police, or the courts. And that forces us to shift in a way. That forces us to consider the deep implications and ramifications, because when you have those criminal cases, they try to destroy you, obviously. They try to put you in prison. And for me, having those moments where I had these criminal cases really made me reevaluate what type of artist or what type of person I wanted to be in society, and whether I wanted to be sitting in prison for years, or whether I wanted to, be successful in business. And so, I think for me in 2007, when I had a very annoying and terrible criminal case in New York City, I knew that painting illegally or painting trains really wasn't for me anymore. I had too much to lose. I was a family man. I was a businessman, and I didn't want to sit in prison and not be able to take care of my family. And so that was a big shift for me. And I think for most of us, that realization is a bit of a wake-up call and makes us shift.
Just before I forget, Lee Quinones and a few of the others that you mentioned, I have tried to reach out. So if there's any hookup you can do, then I'll be all over that. But we could save that maybe towards the end. They are legends as well, yeah, without a doubt. So you've mentioned about the shootings, the stabbings. We're talking about now about people pivoting, away from the illegal side into the more commercial. But I mean, you must have witnessed and must have been around people that were either fined heavily, put into jail, or maybe even killed because of what they were doing. And not necessarily because of gangs and violence. I mean, that played a part in it, of course. But let's remember something. If you're climbing up buildings to put a tag or put a dub or do some artwork, or on the train, surely people got hit by trains. Surely people got hit by cars. Surely people fell off bridges and buildings. You got any stories like that?
Listen, I've lost friends, over the course of my life to violence, to, accidents like that. When we were very young, one of my friends and writing partners was someone by the name of Sane, Sane, a very notorious, infamous guy, and him and his brother Smith. They used to write everywhere, Sane Smith. And in the early 90s, we lost him. And, we got a phone call one day. This might have been 1991. And he was found floating in the river. He was found dead, floating in the river.
Oh, God.
And no one knew how or he lost his life. There was a lot of speculation. But he was known for painting some of these very crazy bridges and really dangerous locations. And maybe he just wasn't successful this one particular night and fell and slipped. And so to me, that was one of the earliest tragedies. Another one was there was these two young taggers, writers in Brooklyn named Slick and Sony. And I knew them through having to clean graffiti, being arrested and having to clean graffiti. And I met these kids. They were from this other neighborhood, and they did not like my friend and writing partner, J.A. The letter J, the letter A, probably the most notorious and the most up in New York City's graffiti history, and still the biggest and the most sort of citywide graffiti writer in New York, 30, 40 years and counting. Anyway, they decided one night to go and cross his name out in a train tunnel on the Broadway train by Lincoln Center in the 50s in Manhattan, and they were both struck by a train and killed going over, my friend's work or tags. And so yeah, there's some really terrible stories, and we've lost friends and or enemies even, due to this thing, because we are lurking around in dangerous places, and we get attacked by dogs, and we get attacked by homeless people or crazy people in the street, and we lose our lives. And there's so many stories of people like that. People getting hit by trains. It's crazy. Or people, falling off of buildings, or climbing a fire escape to paint, and someone in an apartment building opens a window and shoots you because they think that you're a burglar. And there's lots of stories like that as well. And so it's when you're involved in street culture, and I'll call this street culture, it's dangerous. You don't know. You're out there in the world and you don't know what's going to happen. And you're putting yourself at risk and going into all types of environments that most civilians or regular citizens do not do. They're not walking the train tracks, at 3 a.m. They're not climbing a building, at 4 a.m. And so I've lost friends. And I'm in Los Angeles visiting right now, and I've been spending time taking photos of all the graffiti in the streets. And you see a lot of dedications to other, from artists to other artists and friends who've lost their lives. So it's part of the game.
Bit of a sort of similar topic or question, and again, you might feel I'm a bit sick in the head for asking these questions, but for some reason I'm drawn to like the kind of excitement, the edgy, the kind of controversial stories. Listen, everyone's got a vice, everyone's got the demons, and everyone's got their skeletons in the closet. We all know that. Everybody has, even the most cleanest person in the world has got these things. The drugs. I've spoken to all these artists, and most of them have dabbled in drugs, or they've been extreme drug addicts. And some of my favourite artists, sadly, have been them. Richard Hamilton, as we well know, had a massive vice with heroin. It's documented very well in the Shadow Man documentary. His predecessor, Jean-Michel Basquiat. You might know a bit more than me, but even when he was trying to come off the heroin and the crack cocaine and stuff, there were so many people trying to get him back onto it because they believed that some of his very best work, which is his darkest work, was actually the best because he was intoxicated. And you hear that kind of common story throughout. Was it really that rife back in the 80s, 90s and stuff?
It really was. It really was. You mentioned Hamilton, you mentioned Basquiat. There's so many people that dealt with addiction. I grew up in a household where, and in a time where it was everywhere. My father, was very strict and really instilled in me a fear of addiction and of drugs, and so I never dabbled in it or tried it, even though my friends were all getting high, whether it was with crack or angel dust that was also very popular at the time, or heroin or everything else. But it was there. It was everywhere, and it really was almost a pastime, for youth, and not just for artists or for teenagers. When in the 80s, when I was a teenager, angel dust was like the most popular drugs amongst artists.
What is angel dust?
Angel dust is PCP, and so it's a mind-altering drug made from some type of a tranquilizer, and it was exclusively sold in Spanish Harlem. So the whole New York City went to Spanish Harlem to buy angel dust, and you would lose your mind. You would smoke it. And you would lose your mind, and it was just everybody did angel dust. We would be somewhere, very far away, and there would have to be an angel dust break, and we would have to go to Harlem because, dust was a must. And so that was before crack cocaine. When crack showed up, it was the same thing. No one knew it was harmful. It was just a trendy thing, and so people smoked crack. It was no big deal. They would put crack with their marijuana blunts, weed blunts, and it wasn't a big deal until people started getting addicted, and you started to see it, but it happened so quickly, people weren't really aware of it. And so some people got addicted to it and lost everything, and many artists did. And then some didn't. It didn't affect them the same way. But, and the same thing with heroin. It was terrible. And so the addiction ran so deep. And I think part of it for many of these artists and for my friends they didn't have stability at home. They didn't have, these positive examples or these warning signs at home. And the streets were so enticing. It was so exciting. It was the danger was exciting. All of it was so exciting that, what was the big deal about, maybe doing heroin and until you found out that you were entirely addicted and like it took over your life. And so unfortunately it was like that. I saw it everywhere. My whole neighborhood was ravaged by heroin and crack. There was lines at the heroin spots, and I knew the heroin dealers. It was terrible. There were lines at the crack spots, and you just saw families lose everything. People lose everything, lose their lives, lose their jobs, and suddenly be in the streets. And it was nothing to glamorize. It was totally, totally diabolical and terrible. People like Richard Hamilton lost their lives basically to addiction. Basquiat, and if you were lucky enough to get arrested and go to jail, you might get clean. But, most people didn't have the money to go to rehabilitation. And so prison was the natural rehab. You go to prison, you get clean, you come out, you're clean for a couple of months, and then you go back into your addiction. And so I still know addicts. I still know artists that are addicts and really famous people. And most people don't know that they're in addiction or fighting addiction. But it is very, very hard to escape that.
It's so sad. I mean, I'm in business and I'm in art, and we've been doing this since 2014. And as you well know, art or even anything creative from fashion to music is a bit of a melting pot for all kinds of different demographics and all different people from different walks of life. I've met very wealthy people, famous people. I've also met people that, are on their backside financially. But everyone has a contribution towards the art market, and that's why I think it's such an exciting place. And in and around Soho, this is kind of the perfect crossover between high-end Mayfair. I don't know if you've ever been to London, probably, but Mayfair is very expensive. I mean, if you've ever played Monopoly, it's one of the best places to buy on the board. And then, half an hour down the road, you've got the city, you've got Shoreditch, which is quite edgy and stuff. And I feel that Soho is that perfect overlap. You've got very wealthy, you've got very poor, etc. The point is this: you go into a bar, cocaine is going to be around. If you wanted to get a chewing gum or a blast of cocaine, it will probably be easier for you to get the blast of cocaine rather than the chewing gum, which is crazy. And then you walk around the streets of Soho and you see literally homeless people who are clearly on crack, because you see their mannerisms, you see how they shake, you see what they're trying to do in order to raise money to get their next hit. And these people have got no shoes on, and it's freezing. It could be December, January. It's snowing, it's raining. I mean, London weather, as you probably know and can tell, it's not the easiest place to live as far as, the predicting the weather. And these people are out there just trying to get their hits. And I can see it. I can see how it's damaged so many communities and so many families and individuals. And I certainly know from all the conversations I've had, New York was absolutely rife. So, it's quite sad. But again, I do feel it's factored into some of the feeling and some of the passion and energy in artists' works.
Sure. Listen, I think you mentioned before with Basquiat and the darkness that he might have had in his life and how he was able to translate that into some of his best works, or what are considered his edgiest works. Or, and who knows, what demons he was dealing with and how he processed all the things that he was seeing. But you see that a lot. People suffering. Same thing with musicians. They suffer and they produce some of the best songwriting that they ever do. I think of Amy Winehouse as an example.
Perfect
and
example.
Some of her writing. and the darkness that she went through with addiction. And then she OD'd and died. And so, I think that it is sometimes these artists manifest their gift in a tremendous way, with beauty, with emotion, within the painting or the words. And it's a gift to us who can stick around and receive it. But I'd rather not see the great artwork. I'd rather not experience it at all and not see that person suffering. And so I'd say, fuck it. It's better not to have them go through that, and let's look at some butterflies or some shit. And I'm good with that. I don't need someone to be tortured and suffering to be able to give me something that I could experience, or that I could do something in business and make money off of it and flip it in the art market. Like, it's not worth it to me to see someone ravaged or destroyed in an effort to channel something that maybe that they could channel it in a different way, or maybe it's not worth channeling. Is it worth going and meeting your demons and painting them to make a lot of money, to buy more cocaine or to buy more crack? Like, I don't think it's really worth it. I mean, but again, not everybody sees it like that. Some people want to be possessed by this, this addiction or this demon, because they want to access that place to paint those things, and they don't mind the suffering, and that's fine. But it's tough when you see it, when you witness it. You meet these people and you do business with them, and they're in the height of addiction. It's tough to do business with them. It's tough to speak to them. It's tough to engage, even though they might be, creating great things and wonderful pieces. But, and I've had experience of dealing with people in addiction and business and art. And it drives me crazy because it's a very unstable way to work and to deal with people. It's mad. So I don't know. It's tough, man. I think that we you mentioned Soho, you mentioned this intersection of people and artists. Many of them are so gifted and they access something that's very unique and very special that most of us do not have access to, and they're channeling these ideas, these words, these images. But for the regular person that's chasing that isn't an artist, that doesn't have those talents, you'll see them walking around the street barefoot. They're not painting shit. They're just toiling with life and in misery, and it sucks. It's very tough.
Definitely, I hear that. So going back to my journey, I found myself getting into the art market in 2014 because I was approached by a very large art dealer who was basically looking after or trading Hambleton's work. And I fell in love with the story. I was so compelled by the narrative. I was like, this is amazing. And the three that I was gravitated towards the most because it was presented to me this way was Jean-Michel Basquiat, Keith Haring, Hambleton, because in the International Herald Tribune in 1983, there was a article talking about street art, and it was saying that if you were to acquire Jean-Michel Basquiat back then, you'd be paying $10,000. If you were to acquire a Hambleton or a Haring, you would be paying $15,000. And out of the three, the only one they chose to publicize as far as an image is concerned was Hambleton, like a shadow figure. And I found it quite fascinating because when I was looking at that market back then, 2014, 15-ish, you could clearly see that their market had gone financially come to a completely another level. And the only one that I felt was still undervalued was Hambleton because he was still around, he was still alive, and he was still painting. So let me ask you, questions about, these gentlemen. Hambleton, did you ever come across him? Did you ever meet him? What was he like? What do you think about his work? What do you think about his market? Have you ever collected his work?
I didn't. Yeah, I didn't come across him personally. I mean, seeing him around, sure. Didn't know him. Didn't have a conversation with him. Growing up, he was everywhere. He was a legendary figure downtown amongst even teenagers. And so before I knew anything about the art market, before I knew about collecting art or even cared about any of that stuff, Hambleton was present. You would go downtown to Manhattan. You would just go to Manhattan, and all the parking lots in the city had his shadow figures everywhere. And they were iconic. They were bold. They were scary. They were shocking. But they were everywhere. And he was a legendary street figure. Basquiat was not a legendary street figure. He was nobody. He didn't matter. He was really like just meant nothing in the streets. Haring did. Haring was present, and he participated, and he had a lot of stuff going around on streets, on walls, around. But the most hardcore was Hamilton. He was there. He was present. His stuff was surrounded by tags because he was operating on the street where everybody else, where all the taggers, all the the writers were operating. And so I grew up seeing his work. I admired his work. As I learned about him later on in life, I loved it even more. And all three of them, I definitely love and appreciate their work. But he is the one that, to me, is truly a street artist. Those other, Basquiat is not a street artist. Gets lumped into that conversation for convenience, for the market, for improving his market and really making it the story very sexy, But he's not really that, copying a couple of tags or writing a few poems or sayings on the street. It's shit. It's nothing, Haring is really more of someone that painted, but Haring had an existence in the streets because of LA 2. If it wasn't for LA 2, Haring wouldn't be anything. He wouldn't have had the nerve to go out because he would have just been beat up everywhere. And so he had a ghetto pass because of LA 2. And so when I think of those early guys and I think of that market that you're talking about, I don't even consider them to be much of a street art. These are contemporary artists that just were in the right place at the right time in the 80s and were more part of this downtown scene that was, all mixed up along with Kenny Sharp and everybody else, and Madonna and Days and Crash and Lee and Fab Five Freddy and Blondie and all these things, and all these things that were going on downtown, and the Ramones. And that's what it was. It was less about the street, more about this downtown club scene that was happening that brought out this special moment in time, and they were the ones that were there. They were the ones that were there and participating. Lady Pink, as well was there. Those are the people that sort of rose up out of that. I think that Hamilton maybe was older and so was able to sort of manage it better, in a way. And of course, Haring had training and maybe came from a good family, and Basquiat didn't quite make it, but I think it was this moment downtown that sort of exploded. And you have people like Dondi White that came out of that, who also passed away. So, I love that era. I love the era. I love the 80s and those artists that exploded out of the New York downtown scene in the 80s that you mentioned, and all these other ones, because it was so raw. It was so different to what came before it. And they deserved to be stars. They deserved to have success in the marketplace. And the collectors that bought their work back then deserved to reap the benefit because they took a chance and they understood that this was something new and exciting, and they bought it and they owned it. Every time I see someone that has a Hamilton or a Basquiat or these Harings from back then, I'm stunned that they had the vision to buy it and the balls to buy it. And I love that. To buy a day's work from the 80s or a Dondi work from the 80s, it's amazing. You were there, you witnessed it, you decided not to buy Warhol or whatever, you wanted to buy this. It's crazy to me. And so it's wonderful. And I love now that 40 or 30 something years later, we get to see these paintings again. They're coming to market again. We get to see these paintings that have been hidden for 30 years appearing again and selling. I don't necessarily love the numbers because sometimes it leaves me out of the picture and I can't jump in to buy these paintings. But I love that we get to see these paintings again, that they get a new life in someone else's home or someone else's collection, or maybe now a museum, because museums now are finally starting to wake up and collect these people and collect these artists. Ram O.Z. is another one. Tremendous painter. Tremendous. And so important. Without Ram O.Z., there would be no Basquiat. And so these tremendous people, and we're now seeing it. And so it's great. And so I love it. I love it so much. I opened a museum dedicated to this movement, to the graffiti art movement, where you could come and see Ramos E pieces from the 1980s. You could see Dondi, you could see Lady Pink, you could see Phase 2, another giant in this movement, or Delta 2, another artist from this movement from downtown, who's still alive, or LA2, or Eero, who's no longer alive. You know, all these different artists, or Knock 167 from the Bronx, who's tremendous, but obscure, even though he's in permanent collections of museums around the world. And so, you know, I think that, you know, from a business perspective, from an art collecting perspective, it is an incredible time to be awake, to be paying attention, to be collecting artists from this art movement, from this sort of genre, because the opportunities are there, the work is there, there's tremendous painters, and sky's the limit. It keeps going up and up and up in value. There's more and more people that are waking up around the world, and more institutions waking up to want to support it and celebrate it and tell the story. And that helps valuation. It helps all of us that are collectors, you know, for the value of our works. It helps for people that are, you know, speculating and want to just invest as well, you know. And so it's to me, it's a very exciting sort of sub-segment of the art market. And, you know, and I love it. I love that you have a Hambleton behind you. You know, it's tremendous. And but, you know, to me, it sucks that these guys are not around.
I'm gonna quickly do something which I've never done before, but if you think that's impressive, wow, that's you can't see all of it, but that's a very large rodeo horse and rider by Hambleton. I mean, listen, when you come to London next, come and see us. You'll find yourself in Aladdin's cave full of Hambleton. I mean, we've got so many pieces. We've got hundreds of pieces. We really are dedicated to this market and driving it. But like I said, we've dovetailed and we've trickled into these other affiliates now. Because you mentioned LA2. When I was looking at Herring, you know, I thought, you know, very, very cool. But then when I started seeing this other kind of Puerto Rico kind of looking guy who wasn't really getting any recognition or really getting any kind of airtime, started looking into it, and then I discovered that there's this other guy called Angel Ortiz, and LA2 was basically the guy who had all the squiggles around like the little, you know, the dog figures and that kind of stuff. And then with Basquiat, I came across Out Diaz, which a lot of people were referring to him as the real Samo or Samo. And I thought, you know what, these guys, I need to speak to them because I think they're like the underdogs. They're the ones that have not got the recognition, and they should have. And these are the pioneers, and these are the people still alive. And I need to speak to them. Yes. So hence why I jumped onto the podcast, and we're about to do a project with Out Diaz in September, October, roughly. Here in London, and then eventually I'll probably do a project with LA2 because I think that just makes sense, and then we're going to venture into the other artists. And we actually done a show in 2018, I think it was, or 19, for Days in London. He'd done 2 murals, one in Soho and one in Shoreditch. We also got him on the podcast and sold a bunch of his work, so I really adore him as a person and I love his work. I love the fact as well that he was Hambleton's tenant. I mean, what a cool story that is, you know, before Hambleton kind of lost his mind and went a bit crazy. I want to ask you your opinion. So obviously you're I would call a thoroughbred, you know, street artist and someone that really has their finger on the pulse. Hence why he was on the documentary. Hence why you're respected. Basquiat obviously going for crazy money. Herring going for crazy money. Hambleton's kind of crazy money. I mean, I've been present where big rodeos, horse and riders, they are selling in the private domain for up to $1 million. You know, I've seen even a gallery called the Woodbury Gallery who are trying to promote some of his works for, you know, I think it's quite expensive, but like 1.5, even close to 2 mil. I don't know whether it's at that level yet, but that's what they're promoting. Where can you see his market going Now he's died in 2017. Do you think it's got the same legs as Basquiat or Haring, or do you think it might plateau at some point?
I do think that I see it continuing to grow, even if it might be plateauing now. I think that the challenge for anybody that's in this space is the authentication,
Yeah.
is the realness of it, because there's so many fakes around, from Basquiat fakes to Haring fakes to Hamilton fakes, and I've seen a few of them around.
And Banksy.
And so you got to have a great source, and Banksy as well. You got to have a good source. There has to be a reputable source. You have to know the provenance of the pieces. But I do think that it's going to continue to grow and grow and grow and grow. And so I love it because I see them around, and I see there's more and more interest. I think that the collectors need to do more and organize more shows and speak to more institutions to present his work so the public can know more about it. I think it's great that there's a film. Then there's great that there's some information about him out there, but more and more of that information getting out and more exhibitions will lead to his market continuing to grow. Same thing for someone like LA2, who is sort of this underdog, or Al Diaz, you mentioned, who are these sort of underdogs that are really important, not only to the success of Basquiat or the success of Keith Haring, but really important in the world of street art. They have their own identity. They have their own, contribution. Al Diaz was a big deal in the 70s before Basquiat even was anything. Al Diaz was a major player by 76, and LA too, he contributed a lot to Keith Haring's early success. So I think that there's opportunity, of course, for the Hamilton market to continue to grow, and the numbers and the valuations to continue to grow. And for those of you out there that are listening and that are collectors and that appreciate this segment, buy it now. Buy LA2, buy Al Diaz. These are important historical figures. If they happen to still be alive, and their lives are probably saved by prison, by jail, because they had really, tough times growing up with addiction, and all this stuff that we've been talking about. They are the ones that but they made it, and they're around. And so why not buy the work of a living artist now if you could buy Al Diaz? Why not buy the work of a living artist now if you could buy LA2? I would encourage it very much so.
And I've had the same sort of conversation with people on podcasts and people coming to the studio who are older than me, more experienced than me, more educated than me in this sector of investment into art and street artists in particular. And they've said the same thing about Hambleton. They said that one of the best things you can do as a business is reinvest your profits each and every single year back into the assets and store them. Because in 5 or 10, 15, 20 years from now, they are going to be worth double, triple, if not more. And there's no guarantees, but the way the market's going and the way the other predecessors and affiliates have gone, it's quite clear it's going to go in the same direction. So we have bought Out Diaz. We have bought Crash. We've obviously got Days. We've got a bunch of Hambletons. We've got some Retina. I haven't bought LA2 yet. I'm trying to find the right ones, but I'm going to. And I'm venturing into other people now. I mean, you mentioned who did you mention just a short time ago? I've got Futura. Who else did you?
Futura is tremendous.
Massive.
Tremendous person to collect today. I mean, his work has exploded. His valuation has exploded, and he's producing and he's doing shows. And he has something for everybody in the market, from collectibles and people that like that kind of stuff, like the cause stuff, but he's a painter. He's got tremendous paintings. There's some beautiful paintings up for auction, I think, at Christie's or Sotheby's I just saw, wonderful pieces.
Yeah.
And they're still priced. And when you think of the Hamiltons and the Harings and the Basquiats, like, Futura is perfect to be there. He's part of that. The valuations aren't there yet, so you can still get in and you can still acquire these pieces, and great investments in my opinion. And the pieces are wonderful. They're beautiful pieces,
they are.
And so I have bought LA2 as an example. I have bought Futura, and I believe in them. And I believe that they are going to continue to grow, and the market is going to continue to produce great results for them. And they're dedicated. Futura has a great team, as an example, pushing them and doing all kinds of amazing things. And it's not known, right? This is sort of highly speculative stuff. But if you study the market enough and you study the sector of the market and the history, we know what's going to happen. We know where it's going, and so there's these folk heroes, I like to call them, these legendary figures, that they're the ones. They're not the guys that are just coming out of the blue now from an art school who's the trend of the moment. These are historical figures within this genre that people are writing about, that museums are writing about, and will be showcasing their work for generations to come. And you can still buy their work, and they're accessible. And so I bet on the historical figures, and I'm maybe not the best guy with this because I don't necessarily bet on the trend. I bet on the history, and so they're all very important guys.
I wanted to sort of segue into this next bit because I think it's connected. So I know there's no guarantees and no one can predict the future, but in your own opinion, because you've got what I would call great artists, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to make money. And then you have blue chip, the ones that are great, significant to art history, paved the way for so many other people. I mean, sorry to keep on referencing Hambleton, but when I interviewed Black the Rat, he said the only reason why he started is because of Hambleton. And he said that living or dead, the best street artist in his opinion, and you can go back and watch the tape, is Hambleton. And then it's clear to see that Banksy got his inspiration from a bit of Hambleton, but I would say more Black the Rat. There's a clear crossover. I mean, it's funny as well that the Godfather of street art, dubbed by the New York Times for Hambleton, and then you got Black the Rat, which is the Godfather of stencil art, and now you've got obviously Banksy, having massive auctions, like 16 million, I think the last one was. It was 10 million. I mean, it's going absolutely crazy. My question to you, what converts that artist from a great artist to blue chip where their financial gain doubles, triples overnight? How does that happen? Why does it happen?
Well, I mean, I think it happens in many different ways, but I think one of them is the cult of celebrity. They become a household name. They are massively well known, and they're well positioned doing big shows. Banksy, unlike Hamilton and unlike Bleck, when he partnered with Lazaridis and they started producing these shows, they were huge. They were smart. They were brilliant shows, and they knew how to attract buyers. They knew how to attract, smart buyers early on, and he didn't stop. So when you have a tremendous PR and marketing effort behind you, and you're also very smart, and you know how to work gimmicks, you're going to succeed. And I think Banksy is exceptional in that. In this particular market, no one else is doing or has done what he's done. Nobody. In the matter that he's done it, there is nobody else. Doesn't matter if he's not the Godfather or whatever. He is exceptional in the way that he presents his work. He's exceptional in his storytelling. He's exceptional in his presentation, and in the project that he embarks on. And so, I recently was in Brazil at the Os Gêmeos show, and they're another tremendous, painters to collect and to just know about. And they had their collaborative pieces with Banksy. In their exhibition. So Banksy's smart. He goes out and collaborates with those Gêmeos, which are the biggest graffiti writers and art stars in South America and Brazil, and does an action with them in New York. It's very smart. It's very calculating. And so that's how it works. It's strategic. It's smart. You have smart people. You have great production. If you're producing, giant works, he checks all those boxes. And not too many other people, no one else, actually, I would say no one else in this particular genre, with maybe the exception of Cause, I would say, has that. and does that in the same way. I mean, you could compare him to sort of Jeff Koons, in that regard, in that he has the ideas and knows how to deliver, and execute. And that to me is exceptional. And it's a different kind of a thing. It's very big. It's very fancy. It's very much, in the spotlight, and it's very celebrity and sort of obnoxious in a way, right? In your face. Very different from some of the artists that you're talking about. Entirely different than a Hamilton. Hamilton didn't care about that shit. I mean, maybe early on he did, and sort of attracting the public attention, and Banksy's wit sort of comes into play with that. But then Hamilton just wanted to paint in the studio and didn't want to be bothered. And so there's these different factors that come in, but definitely, strategy, smart people, alignment, and it works. But not everybody could put that together. Not everybody wants to put that together. Not everybody can juggle and be a businessman and an artist at the same time.
Yeah, I hear that. My experience, so last year, the whole world, including London, including New York, or pretty much everywhere, was hit by this very unknown thing, which is called COVID-19. Now, there's a conspiracy side of it. There's the facts of, I mean, I'm not here to really talk about that, but the point is, the financial markets got decimated, because the economies got decimated, people lost their jobs, companies went under, institutes folded. Really scary time. It was almost a bit like 2008, 2009, the credit crunch banking crisis happening again, but this time in the form of a virus, as far as the financial markets. But I tell you what, they do say things happen for a reason. And we as a brand, where we're trading blue chip art, predominantly Hamilton and some of the affiliates, I mean, I've got to tell you, it's been amazing for us, because where people are losing money out of their ISAs, bonds, stocks and shares, bank-based investments, your conventional, traditional areas, people are saying, enough's enough. I need to take my money out of these areas and put it into assets, real assets, passion assets. And some of them were buying into whiskey, wine, gold, classic cars, but a huge amount of people started buying into art. So my question to you is, did you have the same experience? Are you hearing the same sort of stories? How do you think the art market's benefiting from COVID-19, the lockdowns and the instability of traditional areas?
I did witness the same thing. I did experience the same thing. In Miami, we're a small art market there, but COVID hit us very hard and shut down the city for a long time. It's a city that was predominantly known for the hospitality business. And so that was all shut down, restaurants shut down, hotels, everything shut down. When it started to coming back to open up, we benefited from that when the hotels opened up. And even before that, everybody in the United States moved to Miami, it seems, or to Florida, because we were the only state that was open. And so people came down and bought their second home or their third or fourth home or second apartment and wanted to fill it with art or hang art on their walls, because now they're in Miami for a while or in South Florida for a while. And so, I with my partner, own and operate an art gallery as well. And we sold a tremendous amount of art. There was no COVID in the art world, as far as I was concerned, in terms of sales. And we sold, we work with tremendous painters, Shu from Amsterdam, Niels Muehlman, tremendous painter. We sold so much of his work. LA2 as well. Blade, so many artists. And so I didn't, I was shocked. But I understood it that, first of all, people that are liquid or that are financially well off and wealthy, they actually made money during COVID. When the stocks tanked, people went in deeper and more and made so much money, and they were protected, And so for us, I saw the art market as being very, very strong, very resilient, and actually growing. And it was shocking, and it was wonderful, and we did very well and continue to do very well, because people now that maybe didn't understand art as an asset see art as an asset and understand that it is a good investment piece and tradable, you know, and it works. And so yeah, it's a wonderful thing for people to start to wake up and say, okay, maybe it doesn't have to be gold, or maybe it doesn't only have to be real estate, because real estate is such a big thing where I'm at. You could also mix it up with art and add art into your portfolio, and not only have this, and maybe you don't want cryptocurrency. Maybe that's too much of a crazy ride, and art is a little bit more stable. It seems. So yeah, so I see what you've seen. So it's great.
Yeah, I mean, even when I was speaking to Cope again, I mean, he was saying that at the start, and I think everyone was a bit like rabbit in the headlights, like we didn't know what was about to hit us. And I think there was a bit of a pregnant pause. You know, I think things did stop a little bit. But then he said he was getting calls out the blue from not your typical art collector or investor, like doctors that have never bought art before and started to stockpile his work in an attempt to preserve their money in unstable times. And not only that, they started making money from the art they were purchasing. And we're definitely experiencing that all the time. So I'm glad to hear that from you, Alan. Let's go talk about the more commercializing art. What I love as well about the documentary you were in, learning the street art, background, tagging was the start. Then it sort of evolved into more beautiful murals and paintings. And then the birth of stencil art, and now these artists are big profiles, they're brands, and they've oscillated or segued or transitioned into doing collaborations with like fashion companies. I mean, you mentioned Corsair. I know Cope has done it. Cope has collab with Adidas, for example. Kors has been on Uniqlo t-shirts. I think they've just dropped something at the DSM, Dover Street Market in London, like jackets which are costing £1,200 now. Expensive, but that's the kind of stuff he's fetching. And Futura, I've got a tag next door on canvas, and then opposite, hanging up on the wall, is a pair of trainers I bought from Colette in Paris online. It's Converse collaborated with Futura, and it's got his tag on it, and it's got like the planets on it, and they're even collector's pieces now. So like, how have you seen artists transition into this kind of commercial collaboration world, and how's it benefited their market? How is it translating to these audiences, these different demographics? How important is it?
It's important. It's been happening for quite a long time. It's been at least 20 years since this collaborative culture started. I worked in fashion for many years. In the beginning, in the late 90s, in the beginning of the 2000s, I worked with Mark Echo in this brand called Echo Unlimited. And he was very early on collaborating with graffiti artists and street artists. And so I worked with Cause back then. I worked with Stephen Powers, Todd James, all these different artists, Futura, to create these products. And it was early, and it was a way for the street art world or the graffiti art world to connect with the mass consumer, people that maybe wouldn't ever buy a painting because a painting is $10,000, but they could buy a T-shirt. You mentioned Cause and Uniqlo, so this goes back 20 years, and you can't find that stuff anymore. Those 20-year-old collaborations, which would probably be tremendously financially valuable or culturally valuable as well, you cannot find the pajama set that Todd James did with Echo Unlimited, or any of these weird things that existed back then. What it did for those artists, what it did for Cause, what it did for Futura, what it did for Stash 2, is made them household names. It introduced them to the mass market. And what it did for the brands is that they made the brands very, very, very cool and checked out a lot of product. Now, what happens when you have a company like Hennessy, doing collaborations with Shepard Fairey, with those Gemios, with Faith 47, with Futura, and printing, 500,000 or 50,000 bottles with their brand and launching global campaigns, that makes an art star. That makes a global art star. That puts these people's name and their sort of brands in front of people. And so John 1 from New York and Paris, huge deal in the art and the graffiti art world. Global tour with Hennessy. Now everybody knows, who John 1 is, that didn't really even care about art and is paying attention. Philippe Pantone as well. And so I believe that those collaborations, Cause with Dos Equis, Cause with this and that, with Colette, that allows the communication of this and the of the artist to appear globally, and adds to their celebrity status, and all those boxes check out in the sales. So when you have these big art stars and you go into your place to buy a piece and you see a Philippe Pantone piece, and they know him from the Hennessy thing, and they know him from Formula One cars, and they like the aesthetic, it might check out faster. People might gravitate towards that because they've heard the name. There's a buzz around it. That whole buzz that starts to happen when this collaboration start to take off, it means a lot. But from a bottom line, from the artist perspective, it's great to their bottom line. These deals are great deals. Futura and BMW, these are great hits for these artists and their lives, and it works together. It used to be that these kind of things were a bit obnoxious or too mass market and too commercial, but it's not seen that way anymore. At least not from a new generation of collectors. They like that, and they want the Futura painting. They want the Futura trainers. They want the Futura watch. They'd love to have the Futura BMW. It all works together in this sort of collector mentality, or that people have. I mean, they want the NFT. They want all this stuff. So I think it all works together, because now there's a different sort of a collector mindset that didn't necessarily exist in the same way before, when it was only about the paintings. You go into people's homes and they have everything Futura furniture with Modernica. Like it's very weird, but this is like this collector mindset, and why not?
I think it helps the cross-pollination. It draws in a new demographic that might not been so aware about the artist, or even have an interest in street art or that kind of area, but now they become fanatics. Look, I'm a prime example. I've bought the Futura trainers, and I knew who he was, but now owning a pair and now owning some of his canvases, it's a really, really cool thing. Look, we spoke about loads about history and everything else. Let's talk about you a bit more. So, like I said, I come across you like properly when I was watching the Banksy documentary. As far as getting to know you as a human being rather than in your work, I know you've got this. Do you call it a business? The Museum of Graffiti, and obviously you just mentioned galleries. You're an artist yourself, so. Talk to me about what you're doing now. Like, what is the thing that Alan Kett is doing day to day?
So day to day, I run a museum. I operate a museum. I'm passionate, like you're passionate, about the world of street art and graffiti art. My interest goes into the birth of the movement and sort of supporting it and providing education around it. There was no museum dedicated to this art form in the world. And so I took it upon myself to build it, to create it, along with some friends and my business partner. Truly, her and I decided to do the work, and we built this museum. And so people could come in, and every day people come in and they learn about some of these artists that you're talking about. And they know nothing about this world. They think that this is all like a gang thing. And so we teach them, and they leave with a deep appreciation of an art form that they've never really known, but that's been in their face or in their backyard or in their city for a long time. And so my day-to-day is running that, programming that. I'm the curator. And so I'm constantly thinking about the next exhibition and planning the next exhibition and negotiating with artists and talking with artists and planning and planning and planning and writing. And then on the other side, I also have a gallery. And so, you educate all these folks, and then you meet people, and they want to collect, and they want to know, they want these artists for their home, and they can't buy Don D. White anymore. Not so easy to find. They can't buy Ramel Z anymore. Not so easy to find. But we do represent the next generation of living artists that are working, that are very important, that people should be collecting. And so we have that as well going on. And so my day-to-day is thinking about art all day long, thinking about artists all day long. I'm here in Los Angeles on a short trip to meet with artists, to plan future works, to go to Tristan Eaton's museum show in Long Beach, at the Long Beach Museum of Art. And so I'm living and breathing this in a way that I never did when I was sort of torn between the worlds of fashion or publishing or all this other stuff. Now it's really just art and full on art. And I love it. It's I love it. It's a lot of work. It's more work than I would ever have imagined, dabbling and dealing with art and presenting art. But I think for me, it's work worth doing. I get to celebrate the artists of my generation, heroes of this movement. I get to meet them and work with them and help them, and they help me in turn, and we celebrate and we push forward so that we can have these conversations, and so this art genre can continue to grow and we can have success. And next thing you know, we're having shows all over the world, and we have other museums that are celebrating this. I started off as an artist. I don't really consider myself an artist too much anymore. I dabble. I still paint in the streets, but I'm really not dedicated to that. I'm like a retired artist. I'm really a businessman and someone that really is passionate about art and that wants to see this art movement be celebrated and grow. And the artists that I grew up seeing that were the most important artists of my life and of my generation, people like Lee Quiñones, for them to get their due and become a household name while they're still alive. And that's the work that I do.
Tremendous stuff. You actually answered my question. I was going to say, are you still painting? Are you still dabbling? Are you still, trying to stimulate creativity as far as being an artist is concerned, or you're hanging up the paintbrushes?
Listen, I dabble. I'm like the most retired guy that I do it, but I do it more to blow off steam. It might happen at 2 a.m. or whatever, and it's just to blow off steam because I had a crazy day in the office and then I want to go paint something. But it's not like when I was a teenager and I did it every single day, and so I don't consider myself an active painter, but I'm an artist. I paint, but the work that I'm doing from a business perspective, it's so much work. It requires so much of my time and thinking that I don't have much time for many more things. I definitely don't have time to paint. If I'm actually making art nowadays, it's more illustrations, it's more in books and stuff like that, because at 2 a.m, maybe I don't want to creep around and I'll just draw something up. But listen, I think that there's so many tremendous painters out there. The more and more that I'm in this world, the more and more that I go to the studios and I see the work of these artists of our generation that are crossing over. Like I was just with Saber in Los Angeles. It makes me not want to paint. These artists are so good. They're so tremendous. It makes me want to celebrate them and push them forward and not do the wacky sort of teenage stuff that I've been known to do. But yeah, so I'm really committed and really dedicated to the projects that I have going on. And I'm very fortunate to be working with some tremendous painters and meeting new ones all the time, and discovering the works of new artists or old artists that are crossing over into a new format, or being able to work with people that are, from other cities or other countries that I never thought I'd have the opportunity to work with. But now, and having a museum, it makes sense. And having a gallery, it makes sense. And there's so much talent out there, and there's so much opportunity that I'm just thankful to be positioned to do the work that I'm doing.
It's good stuff. You know, when I've been speaking to you now for, over an hour, and I've interviewed a few artists. I've interviewed a lot of people nearly in 3 years. I've got over 150 odd episodes, and the closest person I feel that this conversation is. When I spoke to Crash, he was very great artist, very articulate. He seemed very wise. He's very switched on, very business-like, And I'm not saying that other artists are not like that, but I'm going to be totally real with you. Some of the artists that I've interviewed, not naming any names because I think it would be disrespectful, but, the lifestyle's a bit weathered them, it's caught up with them. And you and him just seem like you're on your game, which is great. I love it. And I love the business side of it as well. No surprise why you was on that Banksy documentary. It was fantastic. And you portrayed yourself very, very well. Out of curiosity, how did you get on there? Did they approach you? Like, how did you get on there?
Yeah. They approached me. They were in the United States at the time, traveling around. And I think that at the time I was, I don't know how they found me, but I was working with the Wynwood Walls and the galleries there. Maybe it was Ben Ein. I don't know. They found me through somebody from London that I know.
I meant to be interviewing
I'm
Ben.
guessing it might.
I meant to be interviewing.
Yeah, it was probably. Yeah, it was probably as a result of Ben, who's an old friend and a great guy and a maniac. And so I'm guessing Ben is the one that put me on. Yeah, and it was a cool little conversation, and I was glad to do it to sort of give a different sort of perspective on things. And I think that they did a wonderful job with the film. Truly, I think that they did a really great job with the film, and I'm glad to have participated in it. And yeah, it's for me, it's, I as you can tell, I love to speak, and I love to be able to sort of help this movement go forward, and if I could get out there and contribute something positively or that makes sense, I'm down to do it. And why not?
I've got just two or three more things that I'll ask you, and then we're going to wrap it up. First of all, where can people find you, Alan, as far as following your journey, looking at your businesses, and keeping track of what you're doing?
Sure. So people can find me in a few ways. Online, my website is museumofgraffiti.com. That is the museum that is in the United States. It is, you can see everything that we're doing there and learn about us and follow us on Instagram, on social media, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram with Museum of Graffiti. And so we also, much like yourself, I do an interview series for the museum. And so we've done a few hundred interviews with artists from around the world. You can see that on our YouTube page. You could also see that on our Instagram TV page. And then for me personally, you can find me on social media, also online, as Alan Ketz, or Alan Ketz with an S, since I've been hacked lately. Mm-hmm. But I'm on Instagram. That's the easiest way to connect or see what I'm doing. I'm not so fond of sharing so much these days because I'm so busy. But yeah, Instagram is great, YouTube is great, and then our websites are also great places to see what we're doing.
I'm going to check out definitely your interviews. Alan, is there any announcements you want to make? Anything that's coming up in the future? Anything exciting?
Sure. We do have some exciting stuff coming up in the future. On September 10th, we're opening up a new exhibition at the Museum of Graffiti. It's a solo show by the artist named Saber, Saber, from Los Angeles. The name of the show is Escape from Los Angeles. It's a new body of work that he's producing for the museum, as well as a bit of a retrospective on some of his older pieces. The show is tremendous. The works are phenomenal. And so we're very, very excited and very happy to present his new show. Currently at the museum, we have another great show, an exhibition by a local Florida artist, American artist named Ross terms. He's sort of this incredible figure in street art in the United States, who's lived all over the United States and also in South America. Spiritual guy, and we love his work. And so that's up. And so, I don't know how people are moving around. COVID is going crazy. People are moving, not moving, masking up and getting vaccines or not. But the museum is open 7 days a week, and we are seeing visitors every day. We have a few really great exhibitions now. But for me, I'm very excited to present Saber's work. I've been seeing his work since the 90s and traveling to Los Angeles. For those of you that don't know, he painted the biggest illegal graffiti in the world ever. It was multiple football field size in here in Los Angeles in the LA River. It lasted for over 12 years or 15 years. And he's a tremendous, tremendous painter. And so we're excited. We're excited to work with him and to present him. And come and visit. If you want to come out and get into perfect weather and perfect beaches, come and see me in Miami.
I'll take you up on that, my friend. When I got into business, Alan, my background is in sales, yeah? And in sales, every business person is a salesperson. If you're going to sell art, you've got to talk about the narrative, you've got to sell it, you've got to get people to feel that what you feel. They say the definition of a sale is the transfer of enthusiasm. And my mantra to stay in that enthusiastic mindset or that rhythm is this: be happy, never content. Be happy, never content. Now, Alan Kett, if I were to ask you to give your interpretation of be happy, never content, what does that mean to you?
To be happy and never content. Well, listen, I'm blessed. I'm so blessed to be doing what I did. If you knew where I grew up or how I grew up and where I am now, there's no reason for me not to be happy. Mm-hmm. I am living a dream. I live on the beach. I have a beautiful family. I get to work with some of the best artists in the world. And so that makes me happy. I'm not content because I know that there's room for growth. There's room for me to do better. Every single day I wake up and I want to do better and better and better and push myself to do better, to be better at business, to be better as a father, to be better as a business partner. And so I'm not content. I'm restless. I live a restless life. I work a lot because I know that there's more to be done. There's more work to be done. And so people tell me, I push myself too hard, or, I don't see it, that I'm being successful. That's because I'm not content. I know that there's so much work to do and there's so little time. Our lives are so short. And so I live a happy life, but I know that there's a lot to be done. So that's what I think about that statement.
Good man. Alan, thank you for your time. Everyone who's listening to this, please follow Alan, check out his business. If you're in Miami, go and check him out. And listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. You've been a gentleman. You're very articulate. You've been speaking so well. And I'm very, very humbled that you agreed to come to the podcast. So thank you very much. And anyone else who's listening to the podcast, please subscribe, recommend it to friends and family, download. At this point in time, I should have my TikTok account up. So some of this is going to be shared on there, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, everything. So, everyone be happy, never content. And Alan, I'm going to be in touch. I'm going to send over a message to your WhatsApp and let's try and make some deals happen.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be on. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope to see you soon in person.
Definitely, mate. God bless you. Take care. And be happy, never content, Alan. Nice one. Bye.